California task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. Content warning. It contains discussions of racial discrimination, sexual assault, torture, lynching, and other forms of extreme violence. Contains unedited historical quotations and photographs of white supremacist hatred, torture, lynching, autopsy, and other forms of graphic violence.
Discrimination in promotion and pay. World War I, black workers began to make headway in previously white workplaces and industries. Black men took blue-collar jobs previously held by immigrants who had shifted employment to the war effort. Women took jobs previously held by white women and boys. 195 black workers might earn 300% more doing industrial labor in the North than they earned doing agricultural labor in the South. 196 is discussed in chapters 1 and 5. Opportunities in the North and West led approximately 3 million African Americans to migrate from the South between World War I and World War II, and another 5 million to move between 1940 and 1980. 197. They landed in the North, the Midwest, or the West. African Americans found more discrimination, which translated into racial job ceilings, pay differentials, and segregation by job type. 198. For example, Ford Motor Company refused to employ black workers at a level above general labor outside of the Detroit area, and in the Chicago stockyards black workers were excluded from jobs as foremen, as they were not permitted to supervise white workers. 199. In industrial South, black workers were categorized in lower-level jobs, helping white workers, who would simply supervise work while taking home the higher wage. 201 black employee at the Firestone Company's Memphis plant described how you'd be classified as a helper, doing all the work. Example, Ford Motor Company refused to employ black workers at a level above general labor outside of the Detroit area, and in the Chicago stockyards black workers were excluded from jobs as foremen, as they were not permitted to supervise white workers. 334. Man would get the high wage, but he'd just be sitting there watching. 201. As a result, black workers were penalized both with lower wages and fewer advancement opportunities. Black workers were often only hired in jobs that were far more physically dangerous. 202. For example, Ford Motor Company's foundry, where many black workers were employed, had a lack of safety equipment, poor ventilation, and induced speed-ups that lead to worker injury and death. 203. One foundry worker described others finished a shift, so matted and covered with oil and dirt that no skin showed. We could only tell a friend by his voice. 204. Continued across manufacturing sectors for decades. Black workers were limited to lower-paying categories, barred from supervisory roles, and denied opportunities for advancement. For example, by 1970, 1/5 of auto workers in Detroit were black. Workers remained all but completely excluded from higher-level positions. 205. 68, black auto workers formed the Dodge Revolutionary Union movement to protest racism at the plant. A writer in the organization's newsletter laid out the stark segregation and discrimination then present at the plant. 95% of all foremen in the plants are white, 299% of all the general foremen are white, 3,100% of all plant superintendents are white, 490% of all skilled tradesmen are white. 90% of all apprentices are white. 6. Systematically all of the easier jobs are held by whites. Whenever whites are on harder jobs they have helpers. When black workers miss a day they are required to bring 2 doctors' excuses as to why they missed work. Seniority is also a racist concept, since black workers were systematically denied employment for years at the plant. 206. was not limited to manufacturing in 1950. Salaries of college-educated workers, in both the North and South, were significantly lower for African Americans across industries. For example, black managers averaged an annual salary of around $1,400, while white managers averaged closer to $3. 207 in today's dollars. This translates to a monthly salary of approximately $1,396 for black managers and $3,489 for white managers. 208 discrepancies like this existed in professional, teaching, farming, clerical, sales, and skilled technician occupations as well. 209. And from New Deal protections. 30s, the federal government under President Franklin D. Roosevelt sought to remake the relationship between employer and employees. 210 The New Deal transformed American society and set in motion the creation of the middle class. 211, but for white Americans. 212 The New Deal reshaped the role of the federal government in providing for citizens. 213 programs funded under the New Deal infused a huge amount of capital into the economy. 2 researchers have estimated that the federal government spent almost $27 billion on various New Deal public works programs between 1933 and 1943. 214 Democrats, who rose to power by preventing African Americans from voting through a combination of violence and voter suppression laws. President Roosevelt essentially to exclude African Americans from New Deal programs and legislation. 215 While Northern liberals at the time would not support explicitly racist language in the programs and statutes, the Southern racist aim was accomplished in the structure of the programs themselves. 216 In order to pass numerous New Deal laws, Roosevelt compromised with the Southern Democrats to ensure their votes by largely excluding jobs mostly held by African Americans from the New Deal's protections like unemployment insurance, minimum wages, equalized bargaining power, anti-child labor laws. 217 Agricultural and domestic service workers, and anyone with seasonal or part-time jobs, were excluded from these benefits. 218 Approximately 85% of all black workers in the United States at the time were excluded. 19 Although some historians disagree that federal lawmakers intended to discriminate against African Americans. 220 So compromised to allow New Deal programs to be administered at the local level. 221 By the design of the Southern Democrats in Congress, local white government officials were in control of local relief efforts. Individuals who held the view that African Americans should not receive relief of any kind if white Southerners had laundry to be done or cotton to be picked. 222 While black Northerners received some governmental jobs and black Southerners did not. 223